Twilight's Nightmare, Chapter 26, Solar Meet Lunar, Investigation. Moonstriker could appreciate the scent of salt in the air and the distant sounds of the waves. He closed his thestral-like eyes, letting his keen tufted ears take in the sounds. Opening his eyes, he let his horn darken as shadows wrapped around it. As different as it was from what it used to be, it was very useful for stealth missions. The shadow magic settled around his eyes, and to him, solid matter seemed to be nothing but a light mist. Only living things and magic seemed unaltered. Looking through the wall to see his current targets were a trio of ponies, one of each of the accepted tribes. They were clumsily going about, ready to make leave. He settled in to wait. He had nothing to do until they left, as he was currently on his own. He couldn't even share a joke with his fellow night guard, as every single member was on a mission. A full quarter were tasked with guarding Twilight, Little Star, and the elements of harmony. Sitting in the shadows, his dark coat blended in. He watched life in the city carry on around him, with no pony any the wiser about his presence. He considered his position and how he became what he was today. Before he entered Luna's service, he was a no-pony, a life of crime and petty violence that would have been his only impact on the world. Celestia would have only looked at him disapprovingly, but Luna saw who and what he was and told him that he could be of use, despite his flaws. He could still help make Equestria a better place. He smiled at the memory, exposing his fangs. She extended her hoof to many criminals and undesirables, pointing out that no pony's perfect. That ponies make mistakes, but they only define you if you let them. Some she pardoned, and others she even granted entirely new identities. He knew that serving the Sovereign was very much like being in a cult. Most of her servants revered her. Celestia came across as a distant and stern but loving teacher or foster parent, and Luna deeply cared for each of her servants. She raged when one was hurt, and when in private, beamed with approval with each achievement. Almost a full third of Luna's servants were made up of ponies whose lives she had saved either from monster attacks or suicide. Almost all of Luna's interactions with her vassals were far more personal than anything Celestia shared with any pony, with perhaps the exception of her student Twilight. It was the absurd amount of attacks on Twilight that they had to prevent. All of them just because of the jealousy of Celestia's affection had invoked in some of the entitled nobility of Canterlot. Most of the Night Guard loved Luna in one way or another. She was their mentor, their sovereign, their healer, and their confidant. She tended to the dreams of each of them every night. Or, well, at least when the dreams weren't turned into some of the most nightmarish training imaginable. At this point, he had lost count of all the horrible and terrible ways that he had been injured or killed in the dream training. As much as they should have terrified him. The few times that it had been too much, Luna held him like she held any that needed such comfort. Softly, she would whisper to him,
"It was just a dream."
Letting her magic soothe the worst of his trauma until it was gone. With the lessons learnt, his skills shaped, and the memories of the event softened. No members of the Night Guard or any of Luna's favored had PTSD for long, no matter what happened to them. Luna was much more involved with tending to the spirits and minds of those who had pledged themselves to her than the general public. But the Night Guard knew that they could have no secrets from their sovereign. Luna saw every want, every desire, and every twisted fantasy, and she never judged any of them for any of it. Only one's actions deserved either praises or retribution. He pitied the Solar Guard for all the red tape that they had to go through. In the Night Guard, everything was by Luna's command. The rulebook was basically don't do bad things to good ponies, save Equestria, and do what Luna says. Finally, the individuals that he was waiting for stepped out into the street. Something about the way that they were moving was wrong. It was as if they wanted to go somewhere else, but their hooves wouldn't let them. As the cult he was hunting was said to use mind control, this could be a strong lead. Slipping from one shadow to the next, it was Fool's play to tail them while remaining undetected. He really loved the thestral magic that Luna blessed with him. If the Noble Council knew that Luna was using her magic to effectively create hybrid ponies, they would throw a fit. He almost wanted to tell them just to see how they would react. The one hybrid in RGIS even got a motion from the nobles to close the whole department down, not that Celestia even allowed it to end up on the docket. As he followed them, it was clear to see Van Hoover was a mess with all the Solar Guard in it. Even when they were trying to be unobtrusive, the stallions in their golden armor were visible almost everywhere. But they were too blind to see how much suffering that they were causing. By keeping ponies that looked undesirable or slightly shifty from going about their normal everyday life, even getting food became difficult for some. Just because a pony had the misfortune to be poor or get involved in a few minor crimes did not mean that they were a bad pony. But that's what the holier-than-thou Celestia-worshipping Solar Guard thought. He had only ever seen a couple of Solar Guard even stand up for the Night Guard when they were being trash-talked, and the hybrid from RGIS was one of them. I wonder if Sovereign Luna would ever consider acquiring her for the Night Guard. Just in the first day of his investigation, he had seen 3 low-paid workers lose their jobs because they were late, as the Solars had held them up at checkpoints. He had made a mental note to try to get some pony to check up on them just to make sure that they would be alright. He would mention what was happening to Luna next time he slept. His target stopped at a coffee shop and placed the same large order as they did yesterday, getting more than enough for 20 ponies before continuing on. But unlike yesterday, they stopped at a hayburger, collecting another large order to go. As both places had the orders ready to go, they must have prearranged it. With additional food, that would mean that there would be more ponies. Despite the fact that these ponies were clearly mind-controlled, the Solar Guard just let them pass. It was yet another example of how useless they were. How could they not see what was wrong with these ponies? Ugh, did they train them in anything other than looking impressive and standing still? He thought. Unfortunately, the magic on their armor stopped him from seeing who he was dealing with. Only those equipped with solar armor could really see the identities of the ponies under their uniform enchantment. Even his enspelled eyes couldn't see past that effect. None of the guards used any names in the time that he had to listen, so he would only be able to say when and where he saw them when he reported this, and he would report this. His targets moved on, heading into an apartment building. The building had a pair of bulky-looking earth ponies standing guard. Given that there didn't seem to be anything special about the building, the guards looked out of place. These fools trying to get caught. With his vision, he scoped out the places and looked for ways to sneak in unnoticed. There were some 40 ponies in the building, and a flash of gold in his vision caught his attention. Focusing in on it, one of the ponies in the building seemed to be on the floor in a small room. By the awkward position that they were in, it seemed like they were tied up. The flash of gold appeared again from within that pony. It was a hidden marker used to identify undercover solar agents. Well, that makes things more interesting. How did that fool even get themselves caught? He wondered how many bragging rights the Night Guard would get from pulling this agent out of the fire that they had landed themselves in. A simple shadow step into the small cupboard was all it took to get inside. He then slid out into the room. Switching his eyesight to a spell that let him see perfectly in the dark, he looked over to her in more detail. She was indeed tied up in a rather uncomfortable position. With no light in the small space, he could not tell what her colors were, but he could make every detail of her form. Loosening up her bonds, he at least got the idiot in a more comfortable position. However, his attempts to wake her up were not fruitful. After a moment of consideration, he wondered if this was some sort of sting or operation in progress. I should really check before I rescue her. He placed his horn to her forehead and cast a spell that the Sovereign had taught him personally. He was meant to use it for mission briefings and passing reports between Night Guard, but it could be used here to find out how and why she was here. The spell completed, and the waking world faded as he pressed the question into her mind. Why are you here? Revealing light, RGIS Agent Number 7 was in a bad mood. Normally, a lack of possible leads was the only thing that slowed investigations. Paper Pusher had his hybrid mare friend cooped up in an office with all the files RGIS had ever produced. Now with all the paperwork coming out of that sealed office, the problem was now reversed. There were too many leads, far too many leads, and Celestia wanted them all investigated right now. Unfortunately, with all the possible things that might be out there, some bright sparks scrambled the guard. This forced all the rats underground, in some cases literally. It was almost as if the nobles were doing everything that they could to make life hard for the agents. With all the solar guards dressed in their enchanted golden armor being all over the place, the bad guys and most of the RGIS's informants had gone to ground.
You'd think that they would learn that plate armor is not discreet.
Even the pony selling slightly dodgy magazines had closed up shop and headed out of town. After being stopped by yet another guard patrol, the RGIS agent had the paperwork checked. Twice. She was told to get a new photo as she looked much older than in the photo on her ID. The only reason that she looked older is because she had lines under her eyes due to the stress. Finally, she managed to get back to the hideout, one that fortunately was not in any of the books, or by now it would have had a dozen solar guards using it as a garrison. She had slipped into the secret room in the back, letting out a long, suffering sigh as she took in the work waiting for her. The stack of places that she was meant to investigate before the end of the day was at least as thick as her hoof. But the job had to be done. It wouldn't have been sent to her otherwise. Each of them should take weeks of careful infiltration and making connections before even attempting to enter them. With the pressure from on high though, shortcuts had to be taken. After she read and memorized each location, she burnt the paper, leaving nothing but ash. She added it to the fireplace, making it look like it had been used. With the information on the dozen places, she thought she could investigate firmly in her mind. After that, she checked her appearance. Looking into the mirror, she could see her disguise. Her coat expertly dyed to a pale blue and her mane a lovely purple. Her cutie mark was altered to now appear as a bush with blueberries on it instead of its normal ray of light piercing a gloomy sky. If she had time, she could assume a different identity for each place, but today, unfortunately, she would be burning this identity. There would be no way to hide checking out so many shady places in a single day. She looked around what had been her home for the past few months, and she had enjoyed some of it. She had at least a few ponies who thought she was their friend. She, like many agents, was jealous of Agent Sweetie Drops, the agent who got to stay in the same place for years on end, becoming friends with almost every pony in the town the element of magic lived in.
How much of that was planned?
She thought. Did she put herself in a position to be known to the elements of magic just to make it harder for any pony else to force her to move on? Looking at a single photo with her soon-to-be former friend, she began collecting the rest of the photos, the memories and the small keepsakes slipping the most precious into a bag.
The life of an agent is never dull,
she said to that one photo, tucking it into her mane on its own. The illusion on her horn faded for a moment, and she used a shrinking spell so that all of her keepsakes would fit into a small pouch that she then secured into her mane. Finally ready, she headed out of her room and into the main area of the affordable apartment building.
Well, this is going to be the last blueberry season of this place,
she lamented for what she was about to lose. The building still had a receptionist, and she offered her thanks and a smile to him. Placing a bag of coins on the desk, she left a tip, knowing that this would be the last time that she talked to the chess master that she had passed time with on occasion.
Every pony has something to hide.
She thought back to how embarrassed he was about his skill at the game and how he would be most upset if she told any pony about his ability. He had, unknowingly for him, been playing chess by post with the Princess of the Sun for the last 10 years, and he had never known who he was playing with. She had figured this out when she had seen notes on the game on the princess's desk. Turned out that the princess played many such games, seemingly picking one pony to play per settlement. Some she communicated with via the papers, and some by letters that did not look anything like her horn writing. One or two had apparently even managed to work out who their opponent was and approached Celestia about the game. She had often wondered if it was some sort of test. It was rumored that at least one of the analysts back in Canterlot was recruited for playing well. Was it possible that was the reason that they let a hybrid pony into the RGIS? Despite the fact that there was no way for them to follow the uniform regulations? Would the receptionist get a letter one day, inviting him to play her in Canterlot?
He would die of shock,
she thought, having to hide her laugh. Blueberry waved just before she let herself out of the door to the outside world. Man, the twist and everything, it really throws you in for a loop. But it can leave you constantly thinking, which is very nice. Makes things more interesting down the road. Now let's get on to our very interesting donators. Top donators: TacoCat598, Peter Coulthard, J Tinman, Darkside, Gauntlet, and Only One Thing. Zar630, Strix, Raiden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Drake Lovedragon, Pastel Skies, Magazine, Crazy Killer 557, Dospo, Madman Stan, Delta Omega, Jack Hadge, RuneScythe 9852, Hunter Norman, Stephen Bingham, McDoofus 456, Dash of Evergreen, Rhynie Dragonwolf, Ponyman, Tal Rasha, The Toilet Snake, Sword Brethren Mordred, Ronin Wandering, Random Person Man Guy, Easy, Skyocchia, Leslie Prickett, Jordan Peterson, Crimson Kitten A9, Lightskin, Monster Kitty, Needs a Life, Milan Biahenek, and many more super interesting people. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and live life to the fullest.